I still remember the sound of the clock striking midnight on that New Year's Eve. The champagne was poured, the television was showing fireworks from the city center, and my husband Artem and his mother Zhanna Borisovna were sitting on the worn velvet sofa, completely unaware that their world was about to change forever. But let me start from the beginning. Let me tell you how I ended up in that small apartment with peeling wallpaper, counting every ruble and measuring my words like they were gold coins that could be taken from me at any moment. I met Artem at a friend's birthday party 3 years ago. He was charming, quiet, and had the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. He worked as an accountant at a small firm, nothing glamorous, but stable. I was a junior marketing specialist at a cosmetics company, dreaming of climbing the corporate ladder. We dated for a year before he proposed, and I said yes without hesitation. The first 6 months of our marriage were wonderful. We rented a small one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. It was modest, but it was ours. We would cook dinner together, watch movies on our old laptop, and dream about the future. I loved falling asleep with his arm around me, feeling safe and loved. Then the economy took a turn. The company I worked for downsized, and suddenly I was without a job. Artem's salary alone couldn't cover the rent and our expenses. We were barely scraping by, and the landlord was threatening to evict us if we couldn't pay the overdue rent. It was Artem who suggested we move in with his mother. "It's just temporary," he said, holding my hands and looking into my eyes with such sincerity. "Just until we get back on our feet. My mother has a 2-bedroom apartment, and she's been lonely since my father passed away. It will be good for everyone." I hesitated. I had met Zhanna Borisovna only a handful of times, and while she had been polite, there was something in her eyes that made me uneasy. A coldness that she tried to hide behind a tight-lipped smile. But we had no other options. My own parents lived in a small village 300 kilometers away, and they could barely afford to feed themselves. So we packed our belongings into cardboard boxes and moved into Zhanna Borisovna's apartment on a gray November morning. The apartment was on the 5th floor of a Soviet-era building, with narrow corridors and a tiny kitchen that could barely fit 2 people at once. Our room had just enough space for a bed and a wardrobe, with a window that overlooked the parking lot. But I told myself it was fine. It was temporary. We would save money, I would find a new job, and soon we would have our own place again. The first week was manageable. Zhanna Borisovna showed me around the apartment, explained where everything was kept, and even made us tea in the evenings. But I noticed how her eyes followed my every movement, how she commented on the way I washed the dishes or folded the towels. "You're using too much water," she said one day, watching me rinse the plates. "Water isn't free, you know." I smiled and nodded, adjusting the tap. I told myself she was just being careful, that people of her generation had lived through difficult times and learned to be frugal. By the second week, the comments became more frequent. The way I cooked was wrong. The way I cleaned was inefficient. I was using too much electricity by leaving the light on in our room. I was taking too long in the bathroom. Everything I did was somehow a problem. And then came the money. "Since you're living here," Zhanna Borisovna announced one evening, cornering me in the kitchen while Artem was watching television in the living room, "I think it's only fair that you contribute to the utilities." "Of course," I said. "How much do you need?" She named a figure that made my stomach drop. It was nearly half of Artem's monthly salary. When I pointed out that this seemed excessive for utilities, she shrugged and said, "Heating isn't cheap. And you use the kitchen and bathroom. Consider it your share." I went to Artem that night, hoping he would talk to his mother and negotiate a more reasonable amount. But he just sighed and avoided my eyes. "She's just set in her ways," he said. "Let's just pay it for now and not create problems." "But Artem, this is too much. We won't have anything left to save." "Kira, please. I don't want to fight with her. She's my mother." That was the first time I felt truly alone in my marriage. My husband, who was supposed to be my partner, chose to avoid conflict rather than stand by my side. I paid the money and told myself it was still temporary. I would find a job soon, and then we would leave. But the job hunt was brutal. The economy hadn't recovered, and there were dozens of applicants for every position. I went to interview after interview, only to be rejected each time. Meanwhile, Joanna Borisovna's demands grew. "I need money for medicine," she would say, naming a sum that seemed far too high for any normal prescription. "The plumber is coming to fix the bathroom," she announced another time. "Your share is this much. My friend is sick, and I need to take a taxi to visit her. You should contribute." Every week there was something new. Repairs that never seemed to happen. Medicine that she never appeared to take. Taxi rides to places I wasn't sure she ever went. And every time I looked to Artem for support, he would shake his head almost imperceptibly and whisper, "Just pay it. Please. I can't deal with her when she's upset." I started keeping track of every payment in a small notebook that I hid under the mattress. By the end of the third month, I had given Joanna Borisovna almost as much money as we had spent on our old apartment's rent. And we had nothing to show for it except a cramped room and a growing sense of desperation. The breaking point came on a cold January afternoon, 5 months after we moved in. I was taking out the trash when I bumped into Valentina Petrovna, the elderly woman who lived in the apartment next door. She was a kind soul, always ready with a smile and a piece of candy for the neighborhood children. "How are you doing, dear?" she asked, her eyes soft with concern. "You look tired." I started to give my usual answer, "Fine, everything is fine," but something in her gentle gaze broke through my defenses. My eyes welled up with tears, and before I knew it, I was telling her everything. The money. The constant criticism. Artem's refusal to defend me. The feeling of being trapped. Valentina Petrovna listened without interrupting. When I finished, she took my hand and led me to a bench near the building's entrance. "My dear girl," she said softly, "I've been living in this building for 40 years. I've seen many things. And I'm afraid I have to tell you something that you need to hear." My heart hammered in my chest. "What is it?" "You're not the first wife Artem has brought here. You're the third." The world seemed to tilt around me. "What do you mean?" "Artem was married twice before. Both times, his wives moved into that apartment with Joanna Borisovna. And both times, they left within a year. The same pattern, the constant criticism, the demands for money, the husband who wouldn't stand up for them." She squeezed my hand. "I'm not telling you this to be cruel. I'm telling you because I like you, and I don't want to see you waste years of your life trying to change something that will never change." I sat on that bench long after Valentina Petrovna went inside. The cold seeped through my coat, but I barely felt it. 3 wives. 3 women who had come before me, full of hope and love, only to be ground down by the same forces that were grinding me down now. And Artem had never mentioned them. Not once. That night, I looked at my husband sleeping peacefully beside me, and I felt something shift inside me. The love that had filled my heart when I said, "I do," was still there, but it was wrapped in layers of disappointment, anger, and a terrible clarity. I had been a fool. A hopeful, trusting fool who had believed that love would be enough. But I wasn't going to stay a fool. The next day, I called my grandmother. Babushka Nina was my mother's mother, a fierce and independent woman who had outlived 2 husbands and raised 5 children on her own. She lived in a small house in the village where my mother had grown up, surrounded by apple trees and a garden that she tended with more care than most people give to their children. "Kiryusha," she said when she heard my voice, using the nickname she had given me as a child. "I was just thinking about you. Come visit your old grandmother. I have something important to discuss with you." I made an excuse to Artem and Joanna Borisovna. An old friend from university needed help with something, and took the early morning bus to the village. The ride was 3 hours long, but I welcomed the time to think, to plan, to imagine a future that didn't include that cramped apartment and the woman who ruled it. Babushka Nina met me at the bus stop, wrapped in her old wool coat with a scarf tied under her chin. She hugged me tightly, smelling of lavender and wood smoke, and led me to her little house. Over tea and homemade jam, I told her everything. She listened in silence, her wrinkled hands wrapped around her cup, her eyes sharp and knowing. When I finished, she nodded slowly. I always knew that boy was weak. I could see it at the wedding. He smiled too much and said too little. Babushka, I don't know what to do. She set down her cup and looked at me with an intensity that made me sit up straighter. I'm 83 years old, Kiryusha. I've lived a good life, but I won't be here forever. And I've been thinking about what to leave behind. She reached into the drawer of her old wooden desk and pulled out a stack of papers. This house, she said, placing the papers in front of me. I'm signing it over to you. Today. It will be yours legally, completely, with no one else able to claim it. My hands trembled as I picked up the papers. Babushka, I can't. You can and you will, she said firmly. This house saved my life more than once. It gave me a place to stand when everything else fell apart. Now it's going to save yours. We went to the notary that afternoon. By evening, the house was legally mine. A small, simple house with 3 rooms and a garden, but it was mine. Something that no one could take away from me. On the bus ride home, I formed a plan. The next week, I contacted a property management company. The house was in good condition, and the village had become popular with city people looking for weekend getaways. Within a month, I had found a reliable tenant who was willing to pay a modest but steady rent. I opened a new bank account in my name only and had the rent deposited there. For the first time in months, I had money that was truly mine. When Zhanna Borisovna demanded her usual payments, I started refusing. I'm sorry, but we simply don't have extra money right now. I'm still looking for work. Her face twisted with anger. What do you mean you don't have money? Artem has a salary. Which barely covers our basic needs, I said calmly. Perhaps you should look for ways to reduce expenses. She stormed off to complain to Artem, but I no longer cared what he said. I watched him squirm and avoid conflict, making excuses to both of us, and I felt nothing but pity. He was a grown man trapped in the cage his mother had built, and he didn't even realize it. Over the following weeks, I quietly began to research apartments for rent. I found a tiny studio on the other side of the city, just 1 room with a small kitchen and bathroom, but it was affordable with my rental income. I signed the lease in secret and started moving my things there bit by bit, hiding them in my bag when I went out for job interviews. I also consulted a lawyer. A kind woman named Elena Mikhailovna who specialized in family law. She reviewed my situation and confirmed what I already suspected: I had grounds for divorce, and since we had no shared property or children, the process would be straightforward. But Elena Mikhailovna also told me something that changed everything. Have you ever looked into the ownership of the apartment you're living in? She asked during one of our meetings. It belongs to my mother-in-law, I said. At least, that's what everyone assumes. Elena raised an eyebrow. Would you like me to check the public records? It's a simple search. A week later, she called me with news that made me laugh out loud for the first time in months. The apartment didn't belong to Zhanna Borisovna at all. It was registered in Artem's name. His father had left it to him when he died, and Zhanna Borisovna was merely registered as a resident. She had no ownership rights whatsoever. If Artem decided to sell the apartment or asked her to leave, there would be nothing she could do about it legally. All those years of acting like she owned the place, of demanding payments and controlling everyone who entered, she had been ruling a kingdom that wasn't even hers. I asked Elena to prepare the divorce papers. And then I started planning my exit. New Year's Eve seemed like the perfect time. There was something poetic about leaving at midnight, stepping into a new year and a new life at the same moment. I spent the weeks leading up to it preparing carefully, making sure everything was in order. On the morning of December 31st, I packed the last of my important belongings and moved them to my new studio. I wrote 2 letters, one for Artem, one for Zhanna Borisovna, but I decided that words on paper wouldn't have the same impact as documents. That evening, the 3 of us sat down for the traditional New Year's dinner. Zhanna Borisovna had made Olivier salad and herring under a fur coat, traditional dishes that she prepared the same way every year. Artem poured champagne into crystal glasses that had belonged to his father. The television played holiday programs in the background. At 11:45 p.m., 15 minutes before midnight, I stood up from the table. "I have something for both of you," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. I placed 2 envelopes on the table. The first was addressed to Artem. The second had no name on it. Artem looked confused. "What is this? A New Year's gift?" "Open them." He opened his envelope first. I watched his face as he read the divorce papers, saw the color drain from his cheeks. "Kira, what? What is this?" "Exactly what it looks like. I've already signed them. You just need to add your signature, and we can file them after the holidays." Zhanna Borisovna grabbed the second envelope and tore it open. Her hands began to shake as she looked at the property documents, official records proving that the apartment belonged to Artem, not to her. "Where did you get this?" she whispered, her face ashen. "Public records," I said simply. "Funny how you've been acting like the owner all these years when you're just a registered resident. I wonder if Artem knows that he could ask you to leave any time he wants." The clock on the wall began to chime. Midnight. "Happy New Year," I said, picking up my coat from the back of the chair. "I'll have my lawyer contact you about the divorce proceedings." "Kira, wait." Artem jumped up from his chair, spilling champagne across the table. "We need to talk about this." "You can't just." "I can," I interrupted him. "And I am. The taxi is waiting downstairs." Zhanna Borisovna had recovered enough to start shouting. "You ungrateful girl. After everything I've done for you. You'll regret this." "Artem, don't let her leave." But Artem just stood there, frozen between his mother and his wife, unable to choose, unable to act. In that moment, I felt the last thread of love for him snap. He had never been able to choose me. He never would. I walked out of the apartment without looking back. The elevator descended slowly, and I could still hear Zhanna Borisovna's screams echoing in the stairwell. When I stepped outside, the cold winter air hit my face like a blessing. The taxi driver was an elderly man who wished me a happy new year as I climbed in. Fireworks exploded in the sky above us, painting the darkness with bursts of color. My phone buzzed, Artem calling. I blocked his number without answering. The divorce was finalized within 2 months. Artem didn't contest it. According to mutual friends who still stayed in touch with him, his relationship with his mother had become unbearable. She blamed him for everything, for the divorce, for the apartment revelation, for not being able to control his wife. He blamed her for driving away his third marriage. I heard that they barely spoke anymore, circling each other in that apartment like 2 wounded animals. Zhanna Borisovna lived in constant fear that Artem would one day decide to sell the apartment or ask her to leave. Artem worked longer hours, spending as little time at home as possible. Meanwhile, I rebuilt my life. I found a job at a small marketing agency that valued creativity and hard work. I made new friends. I joined a book club and took up hiking on weekends. My tiny studio became my sanctuary, filled with books and plants and the smell of coffee in the mornings. 6 months after the divorce, I met someone. His name was Dmitry, and he worked as a graphic designer at a company down the street from my office. We bumped into each other at a coffee shop and started talking, and I was amazed at how easy it was. No drama, no games, no mothers lurking in the background. We took things slow. After my experience with Artem, I wasn't ready to rush into anything. But Dmitry was patient and kind, and he listened when I talked about my past without judgment or awkwardness. A year after my midnight escape, my grandmother passed away peacefully in her sleep. I inherited her house officially and all her belongings. I took time off work and spent a week in the village, sorting through her things, crying over old photographs, and saying goodbye. When I was ready, I sold the house. The real estate market had improved, and I got a good price for it. Combined with my savings, it was enough for a down payment on a small apartment of my own, a proper apartment in a good neighborhood, with big windows and a balcony that overlooked a park. The day I signed the mortgage papers, I thought about that New Year's Eve 2 years earlier. I thought about the woman who had walked out of that cramped apartment with nothing but her dignity and a suitcase. She had been scared and uncertain, but she had been brave enough to choose herself. I still am that woman. And every morning, when I wake up in my own apartment, in my own bed, with my own life stretching out before me, I remember what my grandmother told me the day she gave me her house. A woman needs a place to stand, she said. A place that is hers and hers alone. From there, she can weather any storm. I have my place now. I have my life. And no one will ever take it from me again.